We are glad to see you all on this beautiful April day. We were just talking for a moment about it's a little bit windy, but it's nice to see some spring weather finally. Hopefully we don't have the Oklahoma version of spring with the storms, but it is always nice to have to get out of winter and start seeing some sunshine. It just kind of uplifts us all a little bit. As we are talking today, I did want to let you know that our agenda today is really a lot of review for those of you that have been doing RSA for quite some time. We are going to spend significant time on promotion retention decisions and what we need to do for that, because we do have a lot of people newer that are going over this. We've had a lot of questions.
What in the world?
Hang on. There we go. You know, I know that as we get busy, if you're feeling like this is repetitious or not information that you need, you will not offend us if that's what you need to do, if move on in some other direction. But we do want to make sure, because this is something that gets kind of confusing a lot of times for our districts, especially with those of you that are newer to dealing with RSA, that we need some time to be able to really focus on that. So our running agenda, I see a lot of you going ahead and putting your name and district in the chat, just so that we have an idea of who is joining us today. It was really interesting this morning. We did get an email asking if we really used Zoom or not in our agency and what we were using that for. And it was nice to be able to say, you know, we do a monthly call for RSA and have 100, 150 people each month. So that's helps us to be able to communicate with everyone from across the state. And we're glad we have that opportunity to do so. So we appreciate you giving your time for that. Okay, so the running agenda is being dropped in the chat as we move forward, but I'm also going to share this on my screen so that we can see that. Brenda or Sharon, are we able to see that okay? And I can't see you right now, so if you can give me a verbal.
Yes, we can see you.
Okay, thank you. All right, let me fix my screen a little bit so I can see everyone. Thank you. All right, so today we have, again, for those of you who I think by now in the year, everybody knows who we are, but just to be on the safe side, I'm Melissa. I am the Director of Reading Sufficiency, so we get to deal with all of these fun things and decisions together, and joined today with two of my colleagues, Sharon Morgan, our Elementary ELA Director, and Brenda Beamer-Chapman, our Director of Social Studies and Personal Financial Literacy. So two members of our literacy team who are consistently helping us out with a lot of these questions. So on our agenda today, the first thing that I did want to take a moment and go over are changes to our end of year report. The end of year report will be open soon, maybe as soon as Thursday, but I want to make sure that we have everything taken care of for OMES to be able to get that opened. We will send out a newsletter, an RSA newsletter, to make sure that everyone is aware when it is open and available. This is a report that must be filled out by every elementary site, and it has to be certified and due by May 31st. So we will start calling about mid-May if we haven't seen that certified, as a friendly reminder. And then we start calling a little more aggressively as it gets closer to the end of the month, because we do want to make sure that we get that data in and no one is out of compliance. So that we know sometimes we forget at the end of year craziness to get some of these things done. And so we just really are trying to do that as a way of making sure that we are all where we need to be. We are in the process of getting an updated tutorial video made for this report due to the changes that are on it. And the link for that video will be in our RSA newsletter. It will be on our website for the RSA coordinators, and it will also be at the top of the report itself. So you will have 3 different places to access that. I do want to take a moment and show you what this will look like. We are in a test mode right now, so this is not anyone's actual report. It's just an idea of what this looks like. So you will see this link at the top will be updated with a new video. This is the old video, and it's now outdated. Contact name and information will look the same. So who can we contact if we have a question about the report or something doesn't look right? Like, for example, we'll look in there and it will see all zeros, that maybe the data wasn't saved and we need to give you a call to say, hey, something went wonky with that. We need you to go in there and be able to fix that. This is not anything new. We are identifying the universal screener that we used for RSA purposes. Remember that universal screener is the one that we have done for all of our K-3 students. This is nothing new. We've been doing it for quite some time. We're making sure that we use the word universal screener when we're talking about this to distinguish from the screener for characteristics of dyslexia. So again, you can select which was the universal screener that your district was using. So if you were using iStation, if you were using, maybe you only serve K and 1 in your school, you might put iStation and then put no assessment required for second and third because you do not have second and third grade students. If you are have all K-3 at your site and you're using the same assessment for all 4 grade levels, you can click this little box right here and just have to select one. So if we're using iStation for all K-3 students, I can do that and just do it one time. The other situation we sometimes have, if I unclick that, I might have where a school is using something like STAR for K and 1. I'm just making these up. I'm not recommending anything with this. And they say they're using map growth for second and third. Okay, so can look at those different ways. So I can either fill that out, put no assessment required. If I do not have that grade level at that site, there's that reminder right there. Otherwise, if you have the grade level, then we're required to have an assessment. And you can do it for all of the grades. If all 4 grades are at your site, you can just let us know that way. This is a new section that has been added of making sure that we identify the screening assessment used to assess risk for characteristics of dyslexia. And again, looks like we've got a small error there. I'll ask OMES to fix that before they release it, because we really don't need this box here. What we need right here is to be able to, again, identify, just like what we've done before. If we have, let's say, map reading fluency, and then may say we used FastBridge. I don't know why you would use more than one of these, but, or if you're using all at the same site, you can identify that. So this should only be showing up if we click this box. That will be changed before this is released. Also, there is a legislative requirement that we report out the number of teachers who have been trained to administer the screening assessment for characteristics of dyslexia, and the number of teachers who helped to administer that assessment. These numbers can be the same, or they might be different. So for example, if you were as a site using MClass 8 as your dyslexia screening, you might, if you trained your whole staff of 20 teachers, then we would put 20 in this area, but perhaps only 5 of those teachers were the ones who were responsible for administering this to students. So in that case, we would put 5 in that area. Okay. So that's that whole section of really just identifying the screening assessment, how many teachers were trained to use it, and then to administer that assessment, and how many actually were involved in administering the assessment. Okay. With the IPRI, this is what we are used to filling out. There has not been a change to how we enter the data here. We did clarify some of the language up in the text. The expectations haven't changed, but the language was clarified to match what we would sometimes explain a little further when questions were asked. So just to quickly go over it for those of you that might be a little bit new to this report, the initial beginning of year will be preloaded based off of what was certified on your beginning of year report. So right now it all says 0 because we're in test mode and there is not beginning of year data to pull over, but you will see a number entered over here. You will, in this entered program, think about how many students did you place on a reading plan after the beginning of year report was submitted. So this could include current students who were identified as at risk for reading difficulties at any time after the beginning of year report. It could be at the mid-year screening. It could be some red flags went off and we decided that they needed some support in October, November, February, whenever that was. It could also apply to students who moved into the school site that mid-year at any time after the beginning of year report, okay? And either through testing done at your current site, identified that they were at risk for reading difficulty, or they moved to your site with an existing IPRI that you decided to carry forward. So how are you counting that student into your counts? So let's say we had 3 kiddos that moved into our school and 2 that we identified that were already there after the beginning of year report. So we would have 5 kindergarten students that now entered that program in addition to those that we identified at the beginning of the year. The exited program column is for those students who move away from your site and are no longer a part of your counts, regardless of how they were doing. Now, these are students who had an existing reading plan, so they would have been either part of this initial beginning of year number or part of the entered program, and they have now moved away. So we need to take that student off of our count. So if, let's say I had one student who was on a reading plan in kindergarten that moved away in March. So I would put a 1 under exited program. And then finally, these last 2 columns would be thinking about at the end of the year, of my kindergarten students who have exhibited risk for reading difficulties, how many of those students are now reading on grade level or are performing at grade level expectations? So if I had 20 students total that were on a reading plan at some point during the year, and 13 of those are now reading on grade level, meeting those targets, I'm going to put 13 right there. Once I enter this and save it, this last column, the ones that are left, will auto-calculate. Okay, so you'll have to hit save. Sometimes you have to close it and then come back into it to find that this number is now auto-calculated. So you don't enter anything here, but that will take and do an equation across that row to give us the number of students who are leaving kindergarten that are still at risk for reading difficulty. Okay, so we'll do that for each of our grade levels. And again, you'll see that explanation right up here with each of those column headings. I'm going to move down to our next section. This is also new based off of the legislation for dyslexia screening. So for this area, we're going to put in 4 different pieces of information for each grade level, K through 3. First, we're going to identify the number of students that we screened for risk of characteristics of dyslexia. Okay, so if we screened 20 students, we would put 20 in this row in kindergarten. Again, I'm talking about 1 grade level at a time. Of those that were screened, how many showed that they were at risk for characteristics of dyslexia according to the data that we had? So I was going to say, let's say half of them we decided were at risk for characteristics of dyslexia. So we would put 10 in that column. With this next one, then, we are required through the legislation to report how many are receiving intervention in school and outside of school. And we've tried to define what those 2 areas would look like based on some of our previous conversations in this call. So intervention, if they are in school, would be how many students are receiving intervention for characteristics of dyslexia during the school day and in the school setting provided by school personnel. So whether it's the classroom teacher, reading interventionist, special education teacher, whomever is providing that is employed by the school, coming in during that school day, so the child is not having to stay before school or after school. They're not having to leave the school campus to go somewhere. They are in the school setting on that building to be able to get that intervention provided from the school. So let's say we have 7 of those that are getting that intervention during the school day. Again, I'm just making up numbers here. The outside of school would be the number of students that are receiving intervention for characteristics outside of the school day. So it could be that they're asked to come before school to work with a tutor that's employed by the school, or stay after school for after school tutoring. Okay. Or they go see a private tutor that we know about. Okay. Or sometimes in some schools, they might contract with a private tutor to come in and pull them during the day. But the teacher, the family is still having to pay for that service. So there's somebody that's not employed by the school providing that service. Again, this is one that we've had a lot of questions about of, well, what if we don't know if they're getting any additional support? We can only report what we know about. Okay. So on our IPRI, if you will recall, we do have a place where we're marking if the family is seeking additional tutoring, but that was written in the fall. If there's some tutoring and we don't know about it, you can't report on it. I mean, that's really kind of the reality of the situation. But with what we know about, what can we report? And so let's say I have 2 students that I ask that we have them stay after school to receive their intervention. And we have another family that goes to a private tutor to receive a specialized tutoring that they're paying for. And so that would be 3 that we would put in that column. Okay. If you find out after this is submitted, oh, we found somebody else that's going to a tutor, we didn't know about it, please don't panic. Okay, we can only report on what we know about. Okay, let's all say that together. We can only report on what we know about. So I know that has been a very big source of concern, but that's really the reality of where we are. So we'll save that for each of our grade levels. Save that. Get our superintendent to certify it once all state sites in our district have completed their reports, and we'll be finished. Okay, so let me stop there. And Brenda and Sharon, I know you've been monitoring the chat. I see a lot of activity there. What questions do we have about this report?
We have quite a few questions. I'll just start from the bottom. So just a clarification, the outside of school intervention does include after school tutoring by a teacher.
Correct.
Okay. When do we stop adding students as entered? For example, is March a good time to stop the entering?
Yeah, I'd really say March is really a great time. The first 3 quarters, it makes sense that we could still be providing quality interventions and adding them to a plan, especially as they're moving. But once we get past into that 4th quarter, I know it gets more and more difficult. There is not a hard cutoff date as far as anything in legislation. That really is ultimately a school decision. But we really would look to be by about 4th quarter. It makes sense that at that point we may be giving them some intervention, but not writing a formal plan. That gets a little tricky with 3rd graders. They are still under that stipulation of promotion retention. So if they've not been in an Oklahoma public school and you're noticing some concerns there, you might make that exception for 3rd grade students, especially just because we need to make sure their parents are aware of the legislation that pertains to them. And we certainly want to do what we can. You know, if you have a school that's going to extend into the very end of May, you may have a little bit more time to do that, but some schools are letting out at the very beginning of May or even the end of April. So by the end of March, there's just not significant time to get a plan written and intervention applied. So.
Okay, another question. If the student is getting intervention in school and outside of school, which one should they try to mark?
Both. Just and this row will not, when you're looking at this row, this will not compute. So it's okay if we're seeing that the numbers don't add up, nothing's going to add or auto calculate here so that it will not mess anything up.
Do students need to be put on an IPRI if they do not meet benchmark at the end of the year? They've benchmarked all year, but then in the spring they didn't.
Um, Really, no, not at the end of year. End of year scores are really a way for us to gauge what our progress has been across the course of the year. If you have a student that has been consistently declining in their progress and they fall below that benchmark at end of year, as a site, it would be recommended that you take note of that and have a plan to get them going the very first day of the next school year. But this would not be when you would want to write a reading plan at the end of the year. Save that for that next year and use that as good information to start their next year off on a strong note.
Okay, sorry, I'm scrolling.
No,
Okay.
you're fine.
Can a student take a STAR reading test at the end of summer school and qualify for a screener pathway?
Yep, and let's get to that question when we talk about promotion retention
Okay,
report
will
for just
do.
a moment.
Okay, so what if we didn't screen any students for dyslexia?
If you did not screen any students for dyslexia, that means that you probably did not have any students at all that showed a reading difficulty. The law states that for students who are below the grade level target on the universal screener must be screened for characteristics of dyslexia. So on your universal screener, if all of these numbers are 0, then these numbers will likely also be 0. But if there are numbers up here and those are all zeros down here, we'll probably be contacting you to say, how can we make this better next year to make sure that you're in compliance with the legislation?
And then how do they get trained for the dyslexia screening?
So what did you as a district provide when you gave this test to your teachers? What did you provide to your teachers to know how to administer an assessment? Okay, ways that could look would be during a staff meeting, we looked at the technical manual provided by the publisher. It could be that you contracted with the publisher to have somebody come in and give them some training. It could be that the publisher provided an asynchronous video for you to know how to do this, but what is it as a district that you did? And we really, I mean, we're not going to come after you and yell at you if that number is 0, because actually that will help us inform better what is it that we needed to do in the way of providing support to our districts. Okay, I promise you we are not going to come yell at you. We're required to report the information. So that helps us plan for what is it that we need to do for next year.
Okay, I think mainly the other ones are retention promotion. There's
Okay.
one person asking about other people's experience with their dyslexia screener, but we can't really answer that. So other people in the chat, she used a STAR, but would like to know what else other people are using. So if you wanted to answer her in the chat, you could do that.
Okay. As far as screeners go, do be aware that we have currently, and we have listed, there are 10 screeners that are approved for universal screening. There are 7 screeners currently approved by our state board for screening for characteristics of dyslexia. We have just finished, or we're in the process of finishing a review that was requested to see if there were any assessments that needed to be added to either of those categories. And that information will be taken to the state board. Our plan is to take it to the board this month. It's up to the board whether they hear it this month or not. And if there are any updates to either of those lists, we will make sure that that is, once the board has approved any updates, it will be part of the board minutes. It will be added to the RSA coordinator page. It will be added to these reports for next year. And we will make sure that we have that information for you. So just to have that. Also, one question I know that has come up in the past, and I'm seeing this right now. If you'll recall, we do have with our dyslexia screeners, there is a requirement to test for advanced phonemic awareness, which is a manipulation of those phonemes. And a lot of published screeners do not have that. They don't go that beyond the blending and segmenting, which is why the past is required to be used as a supplement for some of our dyslexia screening assessments. There was a bill, Senate Bill 154, I believe, that was being run to try to adjust that. However, it was not heard on the Senate floor in time for it to move forward. So it is dormant for this year and would not be able to go into effect for the next year. That was the same bill that was being run that would allow for exemptions for students who are blind or deaf or on the OAP to be exempt from screening assessments. So again, since that is dormant, I know we had discussed that previously. That is not going to be a reality for this next school year. So we can hope that that gets revived next year, but that might take some districts talking to legislators saying that if this is something that is of interest to them, to make sure that that's being heard. So, okay, coming back to our agenda, let's talk a little bit about the OSTP. Just to reiterate the dates that have been sent out from our Office of Assessments. For RSA reporting on the grade 3 test, the testing must be completed and submitted within these are the recommended windows to get that early score back for RSA. If they get the score back, if this is submitted after April 27th, which is the deadline for getting that submitted for early scoring, if it's submitted after that, then third grade students will receive those scores when all of the other scores come out in, I believe, in June. It just won't be a part of that early scoring release. So you'll have to wait a little bit longer on those few. Remember that we have computer-based testing, and all third grade students do take the OSTP electronically unless there's an individual student's IEP that says that they take this as a paper pencil testing for an accommodation. And for those that do paper-based testing, they have this one. It looks like it starts just a little bit later, but still has that April 27th deadline if we want to get those early test scores back for third grade RSA. Okay. Couple of questions that we've been getting quite a bit lately is, what about students who do not take the OSTP? Can they still move on to fourth grade? The short answer is yes, they can. We still have to be able to have a way of how do we promote these students. So if we have a third grade student whose family has said they're going to opt out or not participate in the OSTP, then to be able to move to fourth grade, we will need to be able to promote that student in a different way. They need to be able to demonstrate on grade level reading. So that might mean that they are promoted through the screener, through they meet one of the exemptions, or we would promote them through that student reading proficiency team, which we'll go over each of those again in a moment for those of you that need that. In the same manner, we've also had an uptick in families who are looking at proficiency-based promotion or wanting to skip a grade. And that is defined in legislation. We don't just suddenly say, okay, we're going to move from first to third grade. You know, there are rules in our legislation that say when that would be allowable, and students do have to demonstrate that they are able to meet those qualifications. So the concern usually is coming when we have a second grader whose family is asking for them to have proficiency-based promotion to fourth grade, so wanting to skip third grade altogether. And yes, that is allowable. Because if you are meeting those provisions for proficiency-based promotion, you are having to demonstrate that you do have those third grade reading skills. So often, and the easiest way to do this is that these are students who are able to pass that grade level target for the screening assessment. That's generally the easiest way. However, if for some reason they are struggling with that screening assessment, but are able to show what they know in another way, it might be through an alternative assessment like in Good Cause Exemption 3. But if they are not able, if a second grade student is not able to meet that third grade level target on a screening assessment for proficiency-based promotion, it's probably likely they're not going to meet the other requirements there as well. Okay. All right, so if you'll recall, we do have our flow charts just to make things easy. This is on our website as well, that decision tree that helps us decide what do we do for our students in third grade. So the first thing we look at is that OSTP, and if you will recall, third grade students get two different scores on the OSTP. They get the proficiency-based score, like all students in grades 3 through 8 receive. They're either marked as below basic, proficient, or advanced on ELA skills. But they also receive what they call an RSA criteria score, and it will say met or not met. Okay, because remember, if you'll recall, that RSA criteria are only using the questions from standard 2, reading and writing foundations, reading, writing processes, and standard 4, which is vocabulary. So it eliminates questions from standards 5, from 6, and from 3. So things like inferencing, using figurative language, grammar, and research. Not to say that those aren't important, but for RSA criteria, we're really looking at, does a student have the very basic reading skills to be able to access text? And so we're using just about, it's about 75% of the test. If you look at the blueprint that covers standards 2 and 4, about in there somewhere. And to meet RSA criteria, those students need to answer about half of those applicable questions correctly. So there's not necessarily a numerical score that's given for RSA criteria. We just say met or not met, and is not a perfect alignment with the overall proficiency score that they receive. What we do tend to find, with very few rare exceptions, are that students that score below basic generally do not tend to meet RSA criteria. And students who score proficient and advanced overall do tend to meet RSA criteria. Where the dividing line generally falls is somewhere in that basic range. Like I said, I know that there are a few exceptions to this, but as a general rule for the vast majority of students, this is kind of where we find, is that we'll find some of those students that score basic do not meet, and some of the students who score basic do meet. Okay, so, but when we're making promotion retention decisions, it's the RSA criteria that we're looking at. So if a student scores basic and does meet RSA criteria, they are eligible for promotion to 4th grade. Okay. So that tends to be the biggest question that we get. A student did not meet proficient, but they met RSA criteria. Do we have to retain them? No, they are eligible for promotion if they meet RSA criteria. Okay, so if they do that, we don't have to do anything else. We move forward. They go to 4th grade, and we celebrate their success and go forward. If they don't meet RSA criteria, then that triggers that we have to make some additional decisions. So the first thing we might want to look at is the screening assessment. On those approved screening assessments, the 10 universal screening assessments, not the dyslexia screening, the universal screening. Did they meet the end of year grade level target for 3rd grade? Okay, so if I come back over here to our technical guidance on our universal screening, remember, the very end of this, we have a chart. And on this chart, we have K through 5, what those grade level targets would be. I am looking for the benchmark at benchmark for end of year 3rd grade, and you will find it is a big number, and it's usually in yellow, to say if they meet this score at any time during 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade, then they are eligible to move on to 4th grade. Now, keep in mind, like, for example, some of our computer adaptive assessments like STAR, FastBridge, iStation, it doesn't matter what grade they are in, because this score moves forward based off of any kind of materials. Some of our curriculum-based measures, such as Acadience or AimsWeb, requires they use different materials for each grade, so they need to be able to use the 3rd grade materials to reach that score. Okay. Question that always comes up is around STAR. If you'll remember, STAR Early Learning is the umbrella term that covers both STAR Early Literacy and STAR Reading. STAR Early Literacy is used generally for kindergarten and first grade because it's covering those very, very basic skills that we're addressing in the early grades. Once students are able to read connected text, generally by the beginning of second grade or sometime even in first grade, they should be moving to STAR Reading. If a student scores this but on using STAR Early Literacy, in other words, they're still working on kindergarten and first grade skills, but they meet this score, that is not eligible for promotion. They need to be able to read in a text doing third grade skills. That's really our purpose here. The other question that we get with screening is, what if a student meets this score? Let's say that 970, they meet that score at the mid-year, but then at the end of the year, they fall a bit below. They say maybe get 965. It just states in the legislation that they have to meet this end of year grade level target one time. So if they score 970, but they slip a little bit below, they are still eligible for promotion. Okay, that does not have to just be still at the end of year. Okay, I'm going to pause there for a moment because I have a feeling the chat may be still active.
We have lots of questions.
I have no doubts.
I don't know if, okay. So back to, can a student take the test at the end of summer school and qualify for the screener pathway?
Yes. Okay. So for summer school, for students who are attending a summer school, they can take the screener and meet that end of year third grade target and be eligible for promotion to fourth grade. They can also take the alternative assessment for Good Cause 3 and meet that at the end of summer school, or complete a portfolio through summer school. We'll get to those exemptions in a moment. And that portfolio is completed and approved. That's how a student can use summer school to be promoted to fourth grade if they were still struggling by the end of third. Okay, is the one of those three things: taking the screener, an alternative assessment, or completing the portfolio.
Okay. There was someone that asked about when we will know the preliminary state testing scores. I don't know that we know that because we're not in the assessment office. But you know.
Let me see real quick if we can. If you'll go to the assessment, you'll see the key dates document on the assessment portal. And let's see, there's our administration. There's where we pulled our information to get that. And okay, RSA reports will be posted. It still says to be determined. So I don't know.
Someone said May 18th in the chat, so I don't know if.
So I know that assessment has been having several meetings. I just have not been able to sit on all of them. So if that's what you've been hearing, then that is likely accurate. Okay, they have not had a chance to update that.
Cognia has May 16th on their website.
Cognia has me. Thank you, Misty.
No problem.
So Brenda,
there was someone asking about summer reading academy requirements, who can teach and how many days.
Okay, let me table that for just a moment. Let's get through our promotion retention and I'll revisit Summer Academy.
Yeah, I think that's all the promotion.
Okay, but don't let me forget to come back to that one.
Okay.
Okay, so pathway 2 with our screener we just talked about. If a student did not meet RSA criteria and is still not able to show that end of year third grade target for the screening assessment, then we need to consider, do they qualify for one of those good cause exemptions? Remember that there are 7. We do have them listed right here. There are 7 exemptions. The first being for students who are English learners that have had less than 2 years of instruction in English and are receiving those services through a limited English proficient or English learner tool. For exemption 2 would be students who participate on the OAP based off of their IEP, that they are automatically eligible for 4th grade. Exemption 3 would be students who demonstrate that acceptable level of performance on an alternative standardized reading assessment. And you'll see that this is linked to that information right here, that they need to be at the 45th percentile. We do know that sometimes these forms are out of date. So if any of these, if you're using a different form, it's perfectly fine, either on the SAT-10, ITBS, or Terra Nova. Any form would be acceptable to meet this for right now. And we were hoping to run a review for that this year, but with other reviews that we were required to do, we simply did not have the capacity to do so. So we move forward with that so that we can update the rules. Hopefully that'll be a review we can do this next year. So again, any form of those 3 identified assessments would be reasonable for meeting good cause exemption 3. Good cause exemption 4 would be a teacher developed portfolio that shows the student is able to read on grade level. And again, this portfolio could be completed during a summer school program. Let me make this a little bit larger. You will notice that this is still making sure that we have all of our screening assessments, and that we are using that screening assessments to show that we have some information about those first 3 levels, but we have to have 4 work samples for each of the 8 standards that are addressed. Remember that this is the 2016 Oklahoma Academic Standards for English Language Arts, Standard 2 and Standard 4, because those are the standards being used in the operational test items on this year's state test. Next year, for the 2024 state test, they will be using the 2021 Oklahoma Academic Standards, the more updated version. And so this portfolio will change next year to reflect those updated standards that will be on the state test. Okay, so remember that this does not have to be a separate assignment for each one of these. I might have a more comprehensive assignment that addresses, let's say, both main idea and using multiple meaning words on the same assignment. And if both sections or both of those were demonstrating mastery on that one assignment, I can use that assignment to count for both of those standards as a sample. Okay. And then this has to be signed by the teacher and approved by the school principal to be able to move forward. Exemption 5 are for those students who are on an IEP. These are students who have received intensive remediation in reading for 2 or more years, have been identified with a learning disability in reading or language, and have an IEP, and then participate in the state testing program, OSTP, not OAP, and that they have made adequate progress toward IEP goals. The IEP team is the one that determines if adequate progress is being made. Okay. The remediation has to occur for 2 years. That does not mean that they have to have been on an IEP for 2 years, because they may have been receiving intensive remediation prior to receiving the IEP through a reading plan or other such documentation that they would have had. And then exemption 6 would be students who have been receiving intensive remediation in reading for 2 or more years, and have been previously retained in K through 3 or retained in pre-K for academic reasons. And this would include being enrolled in a transitional class. So if they went to a T1 class, so they did kindergarten 1 year, the second year did a T1 class, and then the third year did first grade, that T1 class would be considered a year of retention for purposes of good cause exemption 6. And finally, good cause exemption 7 would be for those exceptional emergency circumstances. This is applied for and approved through the Office of Assessment, not through our office, but the Office of Assessment. And it's generally an exemption to the general OSTP overall. So this is not, my kiddo had the flu for a week during 3rd grade right before the test, but things such as a catastrophic car accident, or we lost our home in a house fire, or a parent passed away. I mean, we're talking about exceptional emergency circumstances that occur. So those are the different exemptions that we would find. Come back to our flow chart. If a student does not meet any of these, then the student reading proficiency team is then can meet to determine if that student would best be served through promotion with probation or to be retained. Okay, remember that the SRPT consists of the family member, the current 3rd grade teacher responsible for reading instruction, and a teacher from the next grade level, 4th grade, that is responsible for reading, and a reading specialist if one is available on staff. That team would then meet, look at the data together, and decide if the student should be promoted with probation, which means that we would continue to provide intervention regardless of their scores at the next year, and that we want to make sure that we have that documentation of why they're getting intervention so that we have that recorded, or if that student needs to be retained. And remember that is clearly stated in our legislation, retained does not mean a simple repetition of 3rd grade. Retained means that student would repeat 3rd grade, but must be on a reading plan for the entirety of the year, again, regardless of their benchmark scores. And we've had several questions about this from schools where they kind of call and tell them themselves, and we understand, and we don't yell, we just simply gently remind that student is repeating that grade for a reason. If they didn't hear it the first time, saying it again is not going to make them hear it the second time. They need that explicit instruction to fill in their gaps. So what we see a lot of times is a student who's been retained might be above that grade level target when they take that screener at the beginning of their 2nd year of 3rd grade. But regardless of that score, still need to be on a reading plan to make sure that those gaps are being filled in, because they're a year older than their peers. But what we see is even though they're above, they tend to quickly fall off if they're not getting those gaps filled in to be able to be successful. Okay. This one must be a unanimous decision for promotion. If there is not a unanimous decision, in other words, there are some members of the team who feel that student should be retained, then the student must be retained. It doesn't matter if it is the parent or the school personnel who thinks that child should be retained. If there is anyone who feels that way, the law is very, very clear that child has to be retained. We cannot promote if we do not have a unanimous agreement to promote. That decision then has to be approved by the principal and the superintendent for it to take effect. Okay. So knowing all of that, again, this is linked on our agenda, that flow chart right there. Let's hit those questions, Brenda. I know you've been reading them furiously.
Okay, there's a couple about the exemptions.
Okay.
So does a student have to be on an IEP for a certain amount of time to qualify for exemption 5?
They do not. It does not say they have to be on the IEP prior to the state test. It might be the IEP was written a week before the state test. It might be that the IEP was written 2 years before the state test. So they have to be on there before the state test, but it does not say how long. What it does say is that they have to have been receiving that intensive remediation. They have to have been on some kind of reading plan for 2 years prior to this decision to be able to qualify for that exemption.
The other question on that is, it says adequate progress. How do they determine adequate progress?
So if they are just starting an IEP, then that's where our progress monitoring for interventions can be very useful and critical, because if the goals would be to be able to read CVC words with 95% accuracy. How are they working on towards those goals, or have they been making progress with the interventions that they've been making? It might just, that's perfectly fine. So it's, again, the IEP team can make that decision.
Okay, so we have a couple of plan questions, and then we have a couple of real specific scenario questions. So what I thought I would do is ask you the plan questions, and then
Okay.
you could share the rest of your stuff, and then then I can go back if people have to leave and ask you the specific one.
Sounds
Okay.
like a plan.
So after the EOI testing and you put a student on a plan for the end of year test screener, would you wait to write the plan for the next year, or would you go ahead and write it?
Yeah, to kind of go back on the end of year screening, you would not write a plan based off of their end of year screening score. If they've been above that target above previously, and they've just suddenly dipped down on end of year is not when we write plans. We would recommend that you keep track of that student. So if Sharon takes the end of year assessment and she suddenly dips below that, I'm probably going to record her. And as she comes back in the next year, probably very first thing is I'm going to have my interventionist working with her to see how can we, is she still doing okay? I might give her that screening right off. And is this something that I need to be concerned about? Did we have a little bit of spring fever? What's going on with her? If she's back up to where she needs to be, it was probably not a huge deal. But if she is still showing that she's got some deficits there, then that gives us an opportunity to get started right away with what she might need. But we don't need to write a plan based off of end of year scores. Those end of year scores let us know how we've done throughout the year. Might give us an opportunity to figure out what we want to do at the beginning of next year, but we would save our plan writing for beginning of year.
Okay, there's a couple, like, what are the best form to use showing how a third grade student was promoted?
Okay, great question. So we do have on here documenting decisions. And this is where I would love some feedback from our people on the call today. So this is the form that we've used the last couple of years for documenting those third grade retention and promotion decisions. And we've tried to make this as simple as possible. We made these changes during COVID when we knew we did not have a lot of, we just had a lot going on, and we needed to make this as simple as we could. And we also were trying to eliminate the need for tons of signatures. We would love to see if there are questions or thoughts of with this form that you say, this is something we're really noticing that we need. We have a week or two to be able to make these changes and updates on the website to make this as clear as possible for you. So if you do have some of those, you are either able to put those in the chat. Some of those thoughts can go in the chat, or you can send them to us through email so that we can get this updated and get it on the website for you. Really, we want this updated prior to our testing window so that you'll have this as soon as you have your scores back, and you'll be ready to move forward. So really, as long as, because you'll get your scores back. If we said by mid-May, we want this updated and ready to go by the beginning of May. So any feedback that you have, we are happy to accept. But otherwise, we do have this currently on the website. This is linked on our running agenda as a way to indicate what is needed.
Do all students that are retained need to be on a reading plan or just the third grade students?
All students, if they've been retained, if you're asking them to repeat that grade, there is a gap in their learning. And so we have a responsibility to make sure that we are providing them that intervention, and make sure that that's the reason that they're getting what they need.
Okay,
Okay, I
Melissa.
think I have 3 or 4 questions that are pretty specific. So if you wanted to go ahead, Sharon.
Okay, I just had one and I had gotten a couple of private messages. So I just want to make sure we're clear. So if I have a student that has been on benchmark throughout the year and on the end of year screener, they are below benchmark for the first time, I do not have to create an IPRI for them unless that's the district wants to. It's not
Unless you
required.
just really want to, but there is, I don't know when you're going to be able to get that plan enacted and moving forward. So no.
But they
that's
would
not the
still
purpose of
need,
our end of year scores.
okay, but that student does not have to have an IPRI, but they would need to be counted on single sign-on at the end of the year report as being on, correct?
No, we don't add, okay.
Okay, I just
look.
want to make sure because we've had a couple.
When we go to our survey. Hang on. Okay. When we come down here, we have our initial beginning of year that entered program. So if you write a plan for a kiddo, yes, you add them on to enter, regardless of when they do that. It is not an expectation. I cannot say this enough times. It is not an expectation that we write a reading plan for a student based only off of their end of year score. If they have been fine the entire year and you come in and you test them the last 2 to 3 weeks of school and they've suddenly dipped below, it is not an expectation that we suddenly say you are now at risk for reading difficulty. So you would not add them on. You don't need to count them on there. If, however, you say, yeah, we've got summer school, they're going to summer school, we're going to move on, we're going to go ahead and write a plan. If you've written a plan, count them. If you don't write a plan, don't count them. It is not an expectation you would write a plan based off of end of year score alone. Is that clear? Okay. Sharon, you said you had a couple of different private messages. Was there
Yeah,
another?
but they were about that same subject.
Gotcha.
So we don't write an IPRI and they do not count as entered into the program.
Correct. And that has been our practice the last several years. So that has not changed. We have not changed that messaging at all. So just so that we're clear, we're making sure that that's still being very consistent with what the expectation would be. Brenda, anything else?
There's a couple of specific questions. So if you wanted to do your upcoming stuff real fast.
Okay. And then I also want
people could drop off if they didn't want to listen to.
Okay, but I also wanted to address the question about summer school. So there's a couple of different things with summer school. In the administrative rules, we have 2 options for summer school under RSA. There's a Summer Academy reading program, which specifically is for 3rd grade students and above who've been retained, that has a requirement in the rules that it must meet 4 days a week for 4 hours each day, and must be the teachers must have received specialized training, specifically in letters, and the first volume of letters would suffice for that. And it's been a minute since I've looked at this, so let me just pull this up under the administrative rules. You'll find this is dealing specifically with the Summer Academy reading program. There we go. 4 hours, 4 weeks. It must be 4 weeks, 4 days each week, 3 hours each day. You must have a plan that sets that forth, and it's taught by teachers who have completed letters, or there was, again, they've got this defined, some science of reading professional development training. And we can make sure that that's clarified in the guidance there. And only includes those students in 3rd grade and above who are above, because that's what's been written into the legislation. We know that schools obviously want to serve K-2 students through summer school programming as well, and may use RSA funds to do so. That, however, is not defined in the rules. So you just can't call it a summer academy reading program. You can say we're doing RSA summer school. I realize it's semantics, but that's how the legislation is written, and welcome to Oklahoma law. So call it an RSA summer school. You can do it for all of your grade levels. For K-3 that serve RSA, obviously. There is not a requirement for which teachers can teach that, if that is the case. Okay, we did have some written guidance for that, but I believe we had it last year. I will get that posted and available for you, so that you'll have that. I will just send that out through our RSA newsletter when I send out the information about our end of year report, so that you'll have that right in front of you and you don't have to hunt for it. Okay, upcoming opportunities. Really, I just have the one today. The elementary directors have been working together to create a newsletter and an ed chat for elementary teachers. This is really designed for elementary teachers to hear from all subject area directors at once, since they are often teaching multiple subjects. And there is an ed chat coming in on May 1st at 4 o'clock and again at 7. So you have the registration links for both times. And during that time, those directors will be reviewing the updates for the Oklahoma academic standards, as well as frameworks and any state testing changes that will occur in the upcoming year. So, all right. Okay, Brenda, I know right now it is 3:01, so many of you are needing to sign off to get on to other tasks. You had a couple of specific scenarios.
I do.
Okay.
So someone has a student retained in kindergarten. He has not met 3rd grade benchmark. We cannot verify he was in school in 2nd grade. Parents said they homeschooled due to COVID. Can a letter from the parents saying they provided homeschool be sufficient evidence he attended 2nd grade? And if so, this would qualify him for an exemption?
There is not a requirement that the student has to be attending public school during all of that time. So he would still meet the legal definition of that exemption. So regardless of whether you have the letter from the parent or not, if he was retained for academic reasons in kindergarten, and he had, again, remember the other part of that is received reading in remediation for 2 or more years. So if he was getting interventions during 3rd grade and during 1st grade, or during the kindergarten year when he was retained, he does meet the requirements of that exemption.
Okay, if a 4th grader who was conference-based promoted then qualifies for SPED and has not met screen or OSTP, would they need a meeting with the team? So was conference-based?
Yeah, I'm thinking through that.
Yeah.
So they were promoted with probation, which means that we have to annually review.
Mhm.
Because they are now on an IEP, and I am sure that conversation of how he would be moving forward took place during that IEP meeting, or based off of his needs, then I would say probably no at that point, because he is that would have been now fall under IDEA.
Okay.
See, Brenda's still reading. We had an active chat today. I will look forward to reading it later. We do save the chat so that if there's something that we have missed, we will make sure that we go back and address that. either through an individual email, or if it's something that we feel like everyone needs to have, that we can clarify either in a later call or a newsletter or updated guidance. So, okay.
The only other thing I see is, do you have to have summer school?
There is not a legal requirement that you must provide summer school. Okay,
Okay.
that is an individual district decision under local control. Okay, we will make sure that we save this chat. If there's anything that we have missed, we weren't ignoring you, but I know we are out of time and just past time. So we want to make sure that we are respectful of the fact that you have a lot going on. Thank you for giving us this time that you had this afternoon. And we will make sure that we are making any updates. I saw there were several people that gave us some feedback on that documentation. So we will certainly take all of that into consideration and get any documents updated prior to the beginning of May, when you will need to start working on getting those filled out. In the meantime, if you have any questions, let us know. And thank you for all of your hard work on behalf of our students. We hope that you're able to enjoy the spring weather. Stay safe, stay sane, and we will see you again soon. Thanks, everybody.